All right, welcome back to Online with an Architect. My name's Josh Odgers. We're going to be talking all things Google Cloud VMware Solution, or Google Cloud VMware Engine, I should say, GCVE. Very happy to have Akshay Sharma with us today. Welcome, Akshay.
Thank you so much, Josh. Thank you for having me. And quick introduction to myself. For those of you who do not know, my name is Akshay Sharma. The first name is pronounced like a sneeze. So in case you don't know how to pronounce my name, just sneeze and you'll get it right. And I've been with VMware for about 6 years now, and currently a solution architect for the Google Cloud VMware Engine for the Asia Pacific region. And happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we're a big fan of the multi-cloud solutions, and Online with an Architect has featured some of the other offerings. And I thought we definitely need to get to Google, because I know Google's got some unique characteristics. So definitely keen to learn about them today. So maybe you can just give us a quick 5-minute introduction on, for those who might not be familiar with GCVE, what is the offering?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So in terms of the way GCVE works, it broadly does work on the same fundamentals of VMware Cloud. So if we have done, I understand you've done podcasts on it. So what really is the VMware Cloud? The VMware Cloud really is an option for you to have a ubiquitous layer of infrastructure, irrespective of where that infrastructure is. So it could be your on-premises data centers, it could be the public cloud, it could be your edge locations. So we take the same concept and we work it the same way with the Google Cloud VMware Engine. So at 30,000 feet in the air, that's what it really is. It's a VMware native SDDC that is built on the Google's bare metal infrastructure. And it is built in such a way that it connects to your on-premises data centers or other VMware clouds to seamlessly work in tandem and give you all the necessary VMware features that you need from a compute, storage, networking standpoint, as well as migration standpoint with HCX. And then, of course, we really bring in the goodness of Google with their native services, because each one of these clouds, the ability is to use the native services that a cloud gives you. Otherwise, what's the purpose of cloud really? And that's pretty much what we do with Google. We bring in the native services. So if you're a customer who's looking to use, or I'm pretty sure you're already using a lot of Google services, you would broadly be able to do that here. So that really is broadly what GCVE is about. But I guess the next question you might have is, how does that differ? How's this different from everyone else is doing? And I guess the answer to that really is the approach that we take. When we're driving and providing solutions over here. Now, if we look at most of the cloud providers, we have cloud providers who have been in the infrastructure space for a really long time, and they have mature infrastructure services. We have cloud vendors who have been there to give you licensing benefits and all of that. But when we look at Google as a cloud, Google has always led with a different story. If you are a Google user or a Google customer, some of the first things that will come to your mind is things like Gmail and Google Meet, Android phones and stuff like that. So Google really has played in a different space, and when it comes to data center cloud services as well, they really have existed more towards like the data warehousing space. So if you're looking at getting accurate data warehousing, information on your cloud, they've always existed in the AI and ML space. Although, Gen AI has kind of picked off now. But if you think about it, they've been in the space for more than a decade. I mean, things like large language modules, they've existed for over a decade now. Google did come up with Google Maps, and the reason Google Maps works so well is because they have information, they have data, and this data is not something that was collected yesterday. It's something that has collected over many, many years in order to provide accuracy. And that's really how Gen AI really works. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring those aspects, which are more so in terms of AI, data warehousing, and application, where Google really excels. And we're marrying it to the infrastructure side of things. So when you build a solution on the Google Cloud VMware Engine, it really is end to end. We're looking at giving you a solution that goes all the way from infrastructure into your application tiers, into your security tiers, and then you can go ahead and top it up with additional insight and foresight with things like Gen AI and machine learning, data warehousing, and all of that. So that really is, I guess at 30,000 feet in the air, what the solution does.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of customers who are looking to transform their data centers and
Hmm.
move into the cloud. And I think what I see a lot is customers want to go all in, and it's very difficult to take that one big giant step. So I
Absolutely.
feel like GCVE is a great example of being able to get into Google without having to do a transformation. And then
Hmm.
subsequent to that activity, you can transform the workloads that you might be able to. You can set up new workloads and they can all work together, regardless of whether they're running on VMware or natively. So I see heaps of value in these solutions. And of course, Google has its unique capabilities natively as well. So I think you summed that
Yeah.
up beautifully.
Yeah, no, that is true, Josh. I mean, in fact, that is really one of our philosophies when we talk to customers, because we understand that everyone is trying to migrate and modernize and this whole journey to cloud aspect. But when we talk to them, it's important to understand what's important for the application in itself. Now, an application, by definition, would have at least three layers or three tiers of it, and we want to get into the details, and we need to understand how, by modernizing these tiers, all of them or each of them, would this add value and benefit to your business? If you've got a goal, if your goal is to modernize, the real question is, what are you trying to modernize? Is it a modern approach for your business to your customers? Or is it purely just taking a stack, an application stack, and bringing it to a modern, let's say, microservices infrastructure? Now, the next question we'd want to ask, and we've got customers who do that, even with VMware, we've got things like the Tanzu solution, which can provide you a runtime engine. And, we talk to customers and they say, hey, guess what? We've got this application, we're going to move all of it to cloud. Now, when you talk about doing that, the first question is, how much time and how much effort do you want to put into this activity, and is all of that going to help reach your goal or not? Most of the times customers would have timelines set. And, for us, whenever we talk to them, we understand that there are these 3 4 pillars that are important for business. Number one is being able to move at the speed of business, as we call it. That means you want to be able to, like, migrate all your applications, modify them, stay ahead of your competition, because otherwise, if your competition catches up to you, that's not necessarily good. At the same time, you want to ensure that you do it securely, because if there is a data leak, for example, that can't be good for you. If you're a bank, if you're in the financial sector, and there is word that you had a ransomware attack, that is disastrous for your business. Your customers wouldn't trust you. I wouldn't trust my bank if they were repeatedly having ransomware attacks. Neither would you.
Mm.
So, you've got to take care of that side of things. And then, in order to go ahead and do things at a fast pace, in order to do things securely, we end up bolting a lot of solutions on top of it. You bolt on things, you open additional ports for them to communicate with one another, and as a result of that, you kind of convolute what you're trying to do. You've got too many layers, which means you got too many layers to manage, and you're paying for these services. All right, you might really think that, okay, each service is a couple of cents an hour, it's not going to really impact my business. But then, when we bring that all up to the scale, you've got so many thousands of users and you've got so many of your customers, and when we add them up, tiny droplets make the ocean. That's kind of
Mm.
what happens, and then suddenly you're in this situation where you're trying to drive down costs. And if you don't take care of your costs, then your business model is too expensive, it's too heavy, it doesn't operate in an agile way. So, these are sort of those pillars that we focus on. So we talk to a customer and understand, okay, if this is your goal, is migrating all of it onto the cloud going to help you, or is modernizing everything going to help you? The argument I would raise with the customer is, if you are going to take, let's say, a tier of your application, and you're going to bring it out of a virtual machine infrastructure onto microservices. Sure, we talk about containers, we say containers are the future and all of that. But the question is, if it's still going to fundamentally work like a legacy application, what difference does it make whether it's running on a virtual machine or it's running on a container? What you've only done here is you have rehosted the application. You really didn't think about refactoring. And those are, the whole 5 hours or 6 hours. When we get into those conversations with these customers, we realize that they are not necessarily there. They have a timeline, but the amount of time that is going to be required to reach that timeline might actually be more. And most of the times we realize that there's a better way of doing it. We can half that timeline of yours and break this entire journey up into a two-step process. So the first step of the process is you've got these workloads, you got these applications. Let's say you want to do a data center extension or a data center exit. That's step one. Let's first do the data center exit or extension or whatever. Now you've got your workloads, which were here and the cloud was here. Now we've brought them closer together. From here on, we can continue to do activities, look into your applications. We can do things like assessments and studies based on the things that we've moved, and say, hey, guess what? Out of all the applications you've got here, there are a handful of them we feel are ready for modernization. And you start there. And then, the philosophy we use is we want to give you the flexibility of choice. So if you think you're comfortable with VMware, you want to run a runtime engine for containerizing, sure, you've got Tanzu. But in case you're not comfortable with it, maybe you're someone who's certified on the Google platform, no problem. You can go ahead and spin up, Kubernetes engines, and Google really is the founding forefather when it comes to Kubernetes as well. Go ahead, spin that up, use the tools seamlessly and in tandem. So that really is the philosophy that we take to customers with this sort of two-step process, and really getting into the details of what should be modernized and what shouldn't.
Yeah, and I think that first step is actually really important. So the customer wants to modernize. If it's difficult to do, then a lot of the time the project, the complexity builds and the cost blows out, and then nothing ends up happening. So to me, this first step of actually getting into GCVE is actually an extremely valuable and successful business outcome, because you've actually been able to transition to the location where you want your workloads to run. Mm-hmm. And not only have you achieved that business outcome, you've done it with very low risk, because really we're running a virtual machine on the same virtual hardware, on the same hypervisor, possibly a slightly different release, but same hypervisor, right? Supported hardware, and it's all running with the same tooling. So the risk of that going wrong is very low. And your ability to roll back is also quite simple. So if for some reason you got there and it wasn't what you wanted, which I think is very unlikely, but if something like that was to occur, or a commercial reason you wanted to move back, it's very simple. And then I feel like that outcome is already a tick in the box. You've exited your data center. You've performed your hardware refresh. You've mitigated, performance issues potentially, or capacity issues, and you've got the outcome. Just that alone, I've seen companies take 3 to 5 years to achieve that step. And now we're talking about an offering where you can stand up a net new environment in an automated manner, within hours. You can provide connectivity in very well-known manners and then start migrating. So I just think this is such an underrated offering from VMware and Google that people really need to look at that first step and the value there is. Because I could talk for a day about the value just in that one step.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because certainly if customers come to me and ask them to redesign their data center for them, sure, my team would do that, no worries, but that's a lot of work. There's a lot of steps involved. When you have something that delivers probably 80% of what you need, then when you engage someone like me, we can do the 20% on top. We don't have to do the entire design from scratch because Google's provided that effectively a reference architecture. So, yeah, I think customers are going to get a lot more value out of these solutions with a shorter time frame.
Yeah, that's true. And not to forget, not every application out there, especially on the legacy side of things, not every application likes to be touched, which means trying to modernize them might be a very cumbersome exercise. And in some instances, we have observed is a futile exercise. You spend all this time trying to modernize an application which is so legacy that the amount of time you've taken into modernizing and, like I mentioned, bolting on other aspects to make this function like a new application, you could have either built an entirely new application from scratch if you can afford it, or on the other hand, you could just move it here and then modernize only the aspects that needed to be modernized. For a good example I can think of here is in the banking sector. There's so much of back-end core banking that runs on legacy, and we've had banks who are trying to modernize that aspect, and over a period of time, even banks have come to realize that why are we actually doing this? What is the aspect that needs to be modernized is the front end application, the application you and I use in order to, like, log in, see what how much we've got in our banks, make purchases or make transfers and things like that. That's what has to be really modernized. So they kind of broke it up. You continue to have legacy, and then you have these FinApps, which has brought about fintech that stitches so well with legacy. And this is all modern. This can move at a very, very agile pace. This has got elasticity, it's got scalability, everything that's needed from a modern perspective to take care of hundreds and thousands of users. But this can continue to exist the way it is. We take that entire same logic and say that this is existing the way it is. All you do is bring it onto the cloud. So you don't have to worry about things like a hardware refresh cycle. How many times are you going to upgrade and update the versions of ESXi? What if a cloud provider could take care of that for you? How many times are you going to do hardware maintenance? What if we can move all of that away from you and then have this shared model where we take care of all the backend and you worry about your application or your platform, depending on what you want to put, and go from there? Because that also translates to time saved, right? Because your engineers are spending less and less time doing patchwork, more and more time working to optimize what the business needs. And that's how we make a successful business model, which these are some of the reasons why our customers see value in the Google Cloud VMware Engine. And these really are the conversations we like to have with them.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of key points in there, so hopefully I won't forget them all and I'll touch on them. So the first was, does it matter if it's in a container or a virtual machine? My opinion is, I've never heard a CEO once ask me, hey, can you please put my app in a container? Never.
Absolutely.
Like CIO, maybe, architects, engineers, sure, but CEO has never asked me that. Never spoken at anything near close to that. So I think the key point is the application is running reliably and securely and in a performant manner. And obviously all those day two operations you mentioned about upgrades and things like that, that all translates back to business continuity. And that's what the CEOs always speak to me about, is
That's true.
uptime and the impact on their business. So to me, move the applications in a low risk manner, put them in an environment which is stable and performant and secure. And then whether it runs in a container or a VM, I don't think it matters almost at all. There's going to be scenarios where it does, but in most cases and for most workloads, I don't think it matters. And I don't think the efficiency gained from a container is sufficient value or return on investment for the investment of actually the modernization effort. So
Absolutely.
that's kind of what I've seen a lot of. The complexity outweighs the benefit, in some cases at least. And a lot of developers are probably screaming at me right now, but just in general, overall, that's kind of what I've observed in the last few
Yeah,
years.
look, I mean, I get it. I mean, first up, you've just understood the Google VMware philosophy. This is exactly that we talk about. And I understand that developers might have a different perspective. Now, I'm not a developer, but I've done my wee bit of developing, and I understand what they do is very, very important for the businesses. It's not that what they do isn't important. It's just that when we look at the larger side of things, a lot of what they do can also be done in different ways. For example, what is the whole purpose of spinning up a container as opposed to a virtual VM? You just want something that spins up a lot more rapidly, because unlike a VM, a container doesn't have that operating system. It's just got the binaries that are necessary, which also makes it a lot thinner for you to go ahead and run size wise, as opposed to a virtual machine. But then you want to take a step further and understand how much of application development are you actually doing as a business organization. You may have a handful of them, or you might have one or two applications which you really want to build from the ground up. But if you broadly look at it, a lot of applications, most of them I've seen are COTS applications. Then you have some legacy applications, and then you have certain applications which have a skeletal framework, and then you're kind of tweaking them and building them in line with your business. And then an even smaller amount of applications which you're really building from the ground up, which is like homegrown, as we call it. So you really have to look at all of that and then decide how much of this container is important for you. Because you can run code. You might be using whatever VS Code, or you might be using it on like a mobile Xterm or something like that. You could run that irrespective of wherever it is. You could run that on a laptop. But again, what are we really doing? If we're doing coding, then that's more GitOps. That's you writing source code and putting it in a repository. That may not necessarily have everything to do with infrastructure, right? But okay, you don't want to put it on an online repository and you want to sort of um, do it here. Then that's where we'd sort of think about it and say, hey, guess what? We probably don't need to do this right away.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we've covered a couple of key points. So we've covered just infrastructure refresh, data center exits, the fact that that's quite easy and low risk. We've covered from the modernizing piece. The
Yep,
first step is get the bulk of your workloads close to where you're going to modernize them. So
that's
putting them
true.
close to GCP, of course. And then once you're there, you can decide what should be modernized and what shouldn't. And obviously, you've got that data locality as well, because
Hmm.
if your data's across a WAN somewhere and it takes a long time to move, then that can slow down these transformation projects as well. The other thing that I like, and hopefully customers don't experience this too often, but when you go through a transformation, uh, it might fail. It's possible that the expectation of a transformation is everything to be native cloud, and I think that's probably very unlikely and unrealistic to have a goal to have everything cloud native. Um,
Hmm.
and I would say even getting 50% cloud native is possibly a lofty goal. So to me, having workloads right beside native with GCVE is great value, because if you decide to go one way or the other or stay hybrid, you can do that quite easily.
Absolutely.
So I just think that there's so many options with these solutions, and also ultimately, if you do run, say a Tanzu on top of GCVE, that enables you potentially to have an exit strategy as well.
That's
So
true.
obviously, Google don't want customers to exit from their data center, and the other hyperscalers obviously don't want it either. But if you're a customer and I'm an independent architect, I'm here to help the customer. Well, guess what? Google can give you that great business outcome. And if for any reason unforeseen, this is how we can move you somewhere else. And I think that as well is a high selling point of these VMware multi-cloud solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I also resonate with you, and I do believe that not every customer is going to move and should move everything 100% on the cloud. I know Google wouldn't be too happy about hearing that, but it's just a reality, right? You definitely don't want to have all your eggs in one basket. We understand this philosophy, which is why we came up with VMware Cloud across a flurry of hyperscalers, so that you get choice. It starts off with the objective of preventing things like lock-in and all of that. So that's going to continue. And hybrid is always going to be a very, very important strategy for every business organization, because not everything on cloud might work for your business necessarily from, say, a cost perspective.
Mm.
Because let's be honest about it, the cost of deploying infrastructure on premises might work out cheaper in terms of capex. Now, of course, opex would be a different story, and that's where you might see the cloud story move ahead. But then, if think of it this way: if you've got a lot of branch offices, you've got edge locations, and you're in this scenario where your applications need to be in a position to take decisions immediately. It's an edge location, and it's got to take snappy decisions. All your cloud providers may not necessarily have regions based out of the edge locations that you require. So in a lot of cases, you are going to be doing it on premises, or realistically, Colo. This is just realistic of what we feel. And that's where we believe having both sides of it makes sense. The exit strategy, that's definitely something that we can think about. And more than an exit strategy, what we're trying to do is, what we're saying is, when you move to the cloud, out of the cloud, or onto another cloud, the state of your application stays the same,
Mm.
right? Because understand, it was all about what's necessary for that application. Let us say that you're running an application on Google Cloud, or let's say you're running it on Azure, for example. There are certain services that are beneficial for that application, but as time moves on, you realize that now you're in a position where you want to train an AI module. You want to build in generative AI into this, and you feel there might be more value realized from a Google Cloud. Now, I'm not saying that migration services do not exist. Migration services do exist, but when we're talking about cloud to cloud migration, I'm talking about moving an AVM or an Azure VM
Mm,
into a GCE, which is a Google Compute Engine. And
mm,
those are two different things. Or EC2 to GCE. It's still a different platform,
mm.
which means from a migration effort perspective, I am talking about you creating a copy of a virtual machine, bringing the state over here, configuring that virtual machine, ensuring that it runs with the state of your application, then having to turn something off here and turn something on here. It's going to involve downtime, it's going to involve a maintenance window. I am trying to shorten that window. When I say you take this, you right click, you say move, and it moves.
Mm.
Depending on how you want to, work that application. If your application is stubborn, and let's say your application wants to retain its IP, I'm saying I can go to that level, because we understand your applications move in tiers. You're not going to move everything 100% from A to B. You're
And
going to
certainly
have
not one
maybe
at a time
70%
either,
here. Yeah,
right? Applications,
absolutely.
like you say, group together. So you're not just moving one VM or 100%. You're moving a subset at a time. So it's important to be able to subset them as well.
Absolutely. So this is a real world problem. And then customers like, okay, now I've got 30% running here and I've got 70% there, but this application is stubborn. It's not going to be okay with IP address XYZ here. And then this being on a different
Mm,
CIDR range altogether. So what do? That's where we bring in tools like HCX. So with the HCX, I will create a network extension and I'll say, hey, guess what application? Whatever you were seeing here in terms of your IP configurations, I'm going to stretch that and bring this over here so you see the same thing. Now, as time goes, when 70% becomes 70% on the other side and eventually 80, 90%, then you can flip the switch. You can say, okay, I'm happy with this. Let's take this entire range, move it over here. You can turn this off.
mm,
That level of flexibility is something that would eventually be realized with the power of VMware Cloud as a whole. And this is what I believe will give customers true value and benefit
mm.
from the perspectives. It's not just something we talk about from a Google VMware Engine standpoint. I'm sure we do it from the whole VMware story, but that really is our thought process to how we move applications, and honestly the reality of an application. And because when we talk to customers, a lot of time goes in terms of setting your expectations right,
Mm.
because like you said, they want to move 100% over there, and we have to take them a step back and say, hang on a minute, why do you believe moving 100% from A to B is going to be valuable to you? What's your thought process? Because you need to understand what your CEO or CIO is thinking. And the objective is not necessarily to contradict that or just agree with it, but to see whether there's value in what they're doing, or if we can provide additional value, or if we can set expectations. Sometimes we've been in scenarios where we've had customers who have been impacted by ransomware,
Mm.
and they wanted to be able to move everything onto cloud in 48 hours, right? And sometimes it sounds good, it theoretically sounds possible. Yes, I deploy HCX, I can do a live migration A to B, hundreds of VMs. But then we have to get into the reality of it. Do you have the bandwidth?
Mm.
Is the applications ready to be migrated? Do you have a maintenance window? Do we need to factor a maintenance window? Does the bandwidth you provide, is that going to be sufficient for the number of VMs you're trying to move?
Mm.
If it's a database VM, is there too much data churn? And can I shut that off? Because sometimes what happens is you want to move a database VM, and we say we've got all these tools to do it, and then the customer calls back and says, hey, guess what, it didn't work. Now the reason it didn't work is because that database is churning data at a faster rate than what the migration can handle. So when the migration started, it was ABC, and then it moves here. Now if ABC became D, that's okay, but by the time ABC comes here, this has become ABF.
Mm.
So it's trying to catch up to F. In the meantime, JKH has been written, and now the application doesn't know what to do. It's like, this is not what I started off with. This
Yeah, it's
is
inconsistent.
incorrect information. It times out. And these are some of the real world scenarios we face. So these are the expectations that you would want to set with the customer and say, hey, guess what? You are going to take a downtime. We cannot be working with so much data churn, because this is how much bandwidth you've provided me. This is how much you want to move. And I can only move, let's say, this much at a time. So those real world conversations are what really come into the picture when we're
Yeah.
doing migrations. And I must honestly say, it's not an easy conversation to have, but it's a trustworthy conversation to have, because your customer is going to appreciate the fact that you're not just nodding your head at everything and setting expectations, right? Because what's worse than any of this delay is that you have a migration window and you say, okay, I'm going to make everything go live on Monday, and Sunday evening someone calls you and says, guess what, it didn't happen. That's a customer's nightmare, and that's something we strive towards preventing. So
Yeah,
yeah, I
absolutely. I
guess
think
that's
doing
my
things
two
in
cents
a
on that.
risk averse manner is good. Lots of risk mitigation, rollback strategies. And to your point, the bandwidth between on prem into the cloud is one factor. And then assuming you can get the workloads there, you've then got to have the external connectivity,
That's
let's say
right.
load balancing set up and redundant internet connections and all these things actually, in your hyperscaler to be able to support the workload as well. And then you've got to
True.
switch over all those different networking services to the cloud
Hmm.
provider, and that's not an insignificant task. Um,
Absolutely not. We
so I
try
think
to
setting the
simplify it
expectation is
many a
so key.
times. Yeah, we try to simplify it, like one of the benefits with the way the solution has been architected. So the Google Cloud VMware Engine, it works on a peering concept. So our logic is, if you've got the landing zone ready, you could use that landing zone to peer into GCVE, and it's operational. The same way that you'd peer into, say, a BigQuery or a Cloud SQL or any of Google's other services. But then many a times your customer may not necessarily want to use the same landing zone. Then that involves an effort into creating a separate landing zone, or a landing zone and a DMZ, and that sometimes can take upwards of 60 days, sometimes 90 days. And
Mm.
if your customer wants to move everything in 90 days, then we need to have this conversation and say, hey, guess what, this alone is going to take 60. I don't think I can do what you're saying in 30 days. And that's some of the vital conversations we need to have.
Yeah, for sure. I think definitely customers need to get an architect involved early if they're thinking about a cloud migration for any reason.
Hmm.
And if they think they're going to do a migration in 3 or 6 months' time, get the landing zone set up, get the connectivity tested, get those functions validated so that
Hmm.
you can actually do a test migration. You can start replicating your data. It can be an isolated environment. You can run it up, make sure it actually works. And then
Yep.
that way, ahead of time of a ransomware issue or of a migration, data center exit, whatever it is, that this is actually going to function. Because the last thing you want to do is do this in an emergency like a ransomware or a data center failure scenario or something like that, having not tested it. Because the likelihood of success of a migration to any hyperscaler that hasn't been tested and designed for first, the likelihood of that working is close to zero. You're going to have a lot of
Absolutely.
problems. You get the best architects and engineers on the world with no preparation, you almost guarantee a failure.
Hmm.
So preparation is the key for all of these type
That's
of
true.
activities. And you touched on a great point as well, is just moving a native workload from say EC2, into GCE. Cool, you can do it. There's tools to do it, but that change alone, even there's going to be many people who will say that is a well proven migration, and it's reliable and it works. Cool, I wouldn't disagree, but it's still a change. So anytime you implement a change, there is a risk involved. So simply
That's true.
moving VMware to VMware all but eliminates that risk or it mitigates it significantly. And then once you're there, making that change after the fact is a lot lower risk, and the rollback is also simpler, and the
That's right.
downtime is minimal to nothing. So, I think if we put a little bit of thought into these scenarios and take our technical hat off for a second and put our CEO hat on, then we go, how can we do this in a risk averse way? This is a good strategy for us. Let's go down that conservative path first, make sure we're happy. And if we're not happy, we've got a way to get out. If we are happy, we've got a safe, reliable way to go forward.
That's true. Yeah,
So
I
that's why
guess
I like
that's
these solutions so much, because over my career, I've done so many designs for migrations and DR and all sorts of efforts, and there's a lot of effort involved. And GCVE makes that so much simpler. So
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It does. In fact, interestingly, we've had conversations with customers saying this is actually an ongoing conversation, and the customer says that they want to move native instances of EC2 and Azure VM into GCVE. I sat back, I asked the customer, I'm like, hang on a minute, you could just move that to native Google Cloud. Why do you want to move it to GCV? And the thought process they have is that because VMware Cloud is ubiquitous, if I move all of this here, from then on, moving it across
Mm.
becomes a lot simpler. So, I thought that was, in fact, great thinking from a leadership standpoint of that organization, not just because I work from VMware,
Mm.
but this whole point of how do we reduce effort, or do we want to do a one time effort and then reduce it in future. That's what this helps. So if we've in fact got the tools, so if we do end up in a situation where a customer wants to move an EC2 into ESXi on cloud, it absolutely is possible. Again, choose the cloud that you want. In this case, you want to move it to GCVE, perfectly fine, move it into GCVE, and then on, do what's right for your application. If your application needs, let's say, services from Google, needs an AI module, you need to run Vertex, you want to do data warehousing with BigQuery, perfect, keep it over here. But after that, if you think you're going to see more value on Amazon, maybe you want to run some, serverless functions over there, or you've got credits you want to use, go ahead, spin it up there.
Mm.
The whole value that we bring about is the whole flexibility of choice. We also give you the value of VMCU, or the VMware Cloud Universal Credit System. So Google Cloud VMware Engine is also part of that, which means if you want to take advantage of Google Cloud, the simplest thing I talk to my customers is, we're one of the only hyperscaler solutions who have a single node configuration to give you for testing. So you want to plan something, you've got something in mind, you don't know whether it's going to work or not. Don't worry about it. If you got a Google Cloud, spin up a test node. It's free for 60 days. Of course, after 60 days, you probably might want to move your data, or you might want to convert the same thing into a production cluster. But the point is, for 60 days, we give you that ability to test what you want, see what's actually going to happen, run scenarios, because in our philosophy, seeing is believing. So run it, move that application there. Do you think this does justice to your business organization or not? If it doesn't, no worries, shut it down. It's a free node. But if you see value, just add another couple of nodes, and that becomes a production cluster, and continue running. And you see more value, move more workloads, add another couple of nodes. And the beauty is, this works with your Google credits or VMware credits.
Mm.
It's the power of choice that we want to give.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I really like is I had a customer ask me the other day. They said, we really want to move off one of the hyperscalers, and I won't name them because it's just a customer preference. It's not a real issue with that hyperscaler. But
Hopefully
they
wasn't
said,
Google. If it is,
oh,
we'd like
definitely,
to
no, it wasn't
understand.
good. Of course, I can't say that. But but yeah. So look, one of the hyperscalers, they wanted to move off, and they said, look, what's the best way to go about it? And they were mostly, or probably at least half of their workloads were native, and they were written, for that hyperscaler. So I said, all right, well, you have the option of actually moving it onto one of the VMware multi-cloud solutions. So move it from native onto the VMware platform, right? That is a, low to medium risk project. We can get that done. We can then stop at that point, give the business some stability, right? And then we can set up the destination hyperscaler and then move them across. And then
That's
again,
true.
I have a rollback strategy. So we can leave the VMs there or move them back in the event something went wrong. So
Mhm.
not only is, the GCV option, all the multi-cloud solutions are a great option for running production permanently. They're great for migrating out of a hyperscaler if you're already in one for whatever it might be, a commercial reason, legal reason, whatever it is. Great way to go about it. So I just think it's such a great migration tool because also VMware is very well established and very well known. It's not difficult to find someone with VMware skills in the market. It might be difficult to find a true expert in the market, but it's usually pretty easy to find some people with some pretty good skills who you can help with one of these projects.
Yeah,
Whereas if you
absolutely.
try
And
and get someone with hyperscaler 1 skills and hyperscaler 2 skills at the same time, that's a difficult person to find. So I think that's a really good way to mitigate the skills gap as well in the market.
yeah, absolutely, Josh. In fact, the whole retention of skills really is one of the philosophies of VMware Cloud. When we came up with this concept really 4 years ago. We wanted to be able to reuse your skill sets, and this is a real world example of where it comes handy. If the moment you have someone who's used ESXi, it's a very familiar space for you to
Mm.
go ahead and exist. In fact, even if we get time to do some demos, you'll see how
Mm.
from a Google engine you hop into it, and then it's just ESXi the same way it would be on premises or anywhere else, barring a handful of minor changes. So yeah, I think that works well. Also, what we want to keep in mind is a solution like this, we've already thought about rollback processes and built in a lot of it within the tools itself. So again, coming back to a thing like HCX, if you're going to be doing a live or a bulk migration, tools are there in place within HCX to ensure that what happens in case there was a failure scenario. Is it that we can just do a checksum and resume where we left off, or do we want to do a complete rollback? So those thought processes have already been brought in to this tool, and I guess when you're doing this migration, it just comes down to decisions, timelines, and expectations. That
Mm.
really is it. So that's you know another couple of things that we do there.
Absolutely. So, well, you mentioned demos. Let's maybe jump into some demos, because I think, for people who haven't seen GCVE before,
Hmm.
very familiar tooling. It just feels very familiar. And I think this is one of the huge value props of these solutions. So I'm pretty sure everyone's interested to see what you can show us.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I'd be more than happy to do it. So let me just jump onto the screen, which shows the demo. Okay, here we are. I hope you can see the screen.
We can.
Awesome. So this really is an on-premises data center. It's a lab environment that we've got set up. You can see that I've got my little Linux VM that I'm running over here, and as you can see, the VM itself is on. VMware tools not installed, as mentioned. This is a lab environment, but please don't do this in the actual environment. And let's actually look at what the VMware engine actually looks like. So here we are sort of looking at the you know uh, Google Cloud side of things. I'm just going to be logging into the actual cloud console for us. So this is a familiar space. This is where you'd go to do things like your billing, you're creating your actual VMs, run a big query. As you can see, the actual cloud console, all I really have to do is go here, I type VMware engine, I select VMware engine, and from here on it is going to do an access and identity management. I've already done this previously. We are moving to a new experience. So essentially what we're really going to be doing is the way the look and feel of VMware engine is going to be very similar to the look and feel of the actual cloud console. This over here, as you see it, there's still a few things that are a little different. So that change is going to be happening as we move forward. And once this spins up, you will actually take a look at the environment. Yeah, by the way, this is not a canned demo or any of that. This is actually happening live. I'm actually accessing my lab environment, which is somewhere in the US. And this really is an overview. This is kind of a what do I say, 30,000 feet in the air in
Mm.
terms of what you got. So what is the cluster, what are the configurations you've done, in which location you have it. There's one little feature that we have here called elevated privileges as well. Now, it doesn't look like much, but you might wonder what really is the value of this. And we realized a lot of times when customers run the VMware engine, they also want to take advantage of a lot of native VMware services, like they would want to run maybe an ARIA, for example. And, in such cases, it does involve doing some additional configurations. So with elevated privileges, what I'm actually doing is I'm kind of giving you an N-1, almost an administrative access. And this can be for an hour, can go all the way up for 24 hours. There are going to be some changes on this as well as we go to further simplify this. But broadly, with this, what happens is you get the administrative access for you to go ahead and deploy, say, an OVA template, if you want to deploy ARIA, or if you want to, for example, install Tanzu. And then once that's done, this would get shut off and go back to the existing privileges that you've already set. So That's something rather simple that you can do. Then again, we can look at our clusters, our subnets, the vSphere management network itself. So from here, a lot of this is pre-configured and given to you. As you can see, you've got the FQDNs for the vCenter server appliance. You got the NSX manager and the HCX appliance. And as mentioned, if you want to log in, you can just go ahead and select this, or you see the launch vSphere client over here. Or you can additionally add or create nodes over here. So let me go back and show you how simple it would be to create a new private cloud. So at the moment, this is one cluster that exists. You hit new private cloud, you enter whatever you want to sort of create. You can choose to have a standard private cloud, which is a 3 node cluster on GCVE, or we can also do stretch clusters. So in case you've got business critical applications and you want to set up a stretched cluster, that's also possible over here. Choose your placement group. Again, this is the zones that you want to place it in and the regions that you want to do. Based on whichever region you select, you will have a quota assigned, and based on that quota, you can go ahead and select how many nodes you want to put. So I'm just selecting sort of a random region, may or may not have quota. So you can see here I have 0 nodes in quota. But depending on how your administrator has assigned this to you, you can have the nodes assigned. So 3 nodes is minimum, and then there's no limit. We can have up over 100 nodes in a single VPC cluster. Single node configuration, as mentioned, you want to test something and you're not sure how it'll work. Spin up a node, run it for 60 days. Mind you, there is no SLA on this because it is a test and development environment bed for you. And of course, if it does work for you, you just have to come back here and you have to add nodes and you're done. So that's something that can be done here. Another salient feature we talk about is customization of cores. So you might ask me, what's the value of this? What happens is, in a lot of cases, we have applications which are licensed by core. And if I have to license, for example, 36 cores for an application that may not necessarily need more than 8, I am paying money unnecessarily. So with this, we're able to choose the actual number of cores that we want, physical cores. This is turned on and off in BIOS. So you come here, select the cores, and then this host or this node is only going to give you that many cores, and you can license it accordingly. If you want to be in a position to up the cores in the future, you come back to the configuration, change the cores, do a switch off and a switch on, and you're back to go. Then, of course, you have the cider block preferences and all of that you would want to set up. In terms of the
I
actual
think selecting cores is quite a good one. I think anyone who's gone through a licensing exercise with one of the major vendors knows how important that feature is. So certainly that's a valuable one. And I think just on the summary screen, for those who are probably interested, we can see here that there's 3 nodes, total vCPU or total CPU capacity is 108 cores, 2.3 terabytes of RAM, and 57 terabytes of raw capacity with the 9.6 of cache. So that gives you a bit of an indication of what you're getting out of 3 nodes. It's quite a lot of resources.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, a lot of new things coming the GCVE way in the coming year. So one of the greatest announcements we have just done is we have also brought in what we call storage only nodes, which means if you're in a scenario where you have more data storage and you don't actually need the compute, you add the same node. Now you're going to be adding fundamentally this same configuration into your cluster. And then when you make it a storage only node, you turn off the compute and you create an HCX mesh, HCI mesh for your storage. The benefit that we provide here is that it's not just technical, where you shut off the nodes and it works technically, but there is also a commercial benefit. So you can see a license reduction cost in tune of about 20 to 25%. And then in future, when you need the compute, you simply turn it back on. That's one of the unique features, in fact, we have with GCV, and then a couple more that we're going to be adding.
And I think we should probably highlight this feature because, I was aware of this feature a while ago. Some of my friends at Google sort of let me in on a secret, which of course I kept. So to me, storage only nodes have been something very advantageous for HCI for a long time.
Hmm.
Nutanix, when I was at Nutanix, we pioneered that and we designed those first back in 2015.
Right.
And the advantage that Nutanix customers had back then was increased capacity, increased resiliency, and increased performance by having that scale out storage capacity.
That's
So,
true.
very valuable feature. And I think one of the good things here is, you don't necessarily want to use a different tier of storage. And we can talk about the other options as well after this, but
Yeah.
simply having more capacity in your vSAN data store without having to put more hosts in from a compute perspective is very valuable. So don't underestimate the value of this storage only offering. I think it's great. I hope the other hyperscalers do the same. I'm sure Google hopes they don't, but I think it's a really good option for customers. And as far as I know, it is unique to GCVE at this stage.
Yeah, that's true, Josh. In fact, this is something we've done in accordance and concurrence by listening to our customers, because the whole concept of disaggregated storage, as
Mm,
you know it was done with Nutanix. It is an important concept, if you ask me, because
mm,
the fundamentals of HCI works in a way that it's predominantly a scale out storage, which means every
mm,
time you're adding storage, you are adding a node, and that node is going to come to you with compute and memory. And we understand most of the times you don't end up using or needing that computer memory. And every time we do this, we're kind of defeating the concept of efficiency here, because
mm,
we talk about doing virtualization from the concept of efficiency. Why does virtualization exist? Is because rather than you running 10 servers at 10% capacity, you want to be able to bring all of that together and run a more dense capacity of servers, because these servers are not running for free, right? You're paying for power, you're paying for cooling, if not anything, and this is going to add up.
mm,
So when we came with the concept of disaggregated storage on GCVE, we realized it adds value from two perspectives. One is the whole charging your customers for what they need rather than giving them stuff that they don't need. And apart from this, the other value we saw is a lot of applications. We have other tiers of storage. You can, for example, take advantage of a NetApp Cloud Volume if that's what is useful to your business. You can also run Google's cloud storage, for example. And what happens here is those aren't necessarily performance tiers as a vSAN is. A vSAN is an excellent NVMe scale out architecture storage, which means the input and output you're going to get is a lot more than you would get with any of these tiers. And then the whole aspect of having to manage two different data stores, again, we realized it didn't resonate with a lot of customers. It's not what they wanted to do. And that's when we realized the simplest route over here was to have disaggregated storage or storage only nodes. And I
mm.
guess the fact that we were able to also give them a commercial benefit on licensing just further sort of sweetens the deal.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, having it at 70% or 75% of the price is fantastic. And one thing that I'll say, for having done a lot of performance testing on these storage only nodes over the years, is you may well be, or the listeners may well be surprised that you actually improve your CPU efficiency by having faster storage. So if you add storage only nodes and your latency reduces and your IO increases, the CPU wait time, where the IO is waiting to be acknowledged by the CPU, is reduced, which means that your CPU overcommitment can potentially be higher, leading to better performance, better commercial arrangements as well. So, storage only nodes are not just a way to expand something technically, it's actually a way to get a lower total cost of ownership as well. So,
Right.
that's why I was quite excited when I first heard about this, because it is a really good option. And I think it's, to your point as well, it is complementary to using a NetApp volume.
Hmm.
Because you can have a tier one storage with the vSAN data store, and then you can have NetApp. Not that it's slow or low performance or anything, but it's not your primary storage per se. So you've got NetApp there for your higher capacity, maybe lower performance requirements, and they're very complementary. So you may not
Absolutely.
have enough data to justify having a NetApp volume there, and a storage only node or a few of them would be a perfect use case. Or you may have just a lot of data, both primary and secondary, and you can mix and match both of these to get a really good outcome. So I personally really like the flexibility as an architect because I can give customers choice of vendors as well. They might want to or have NetApp on-prem, so using it, with GCVE might make sense. It might be a great migration strategy even, but certainly having multiple options, scaling out HCI natively with the storage only or with NetApp, they're all good options.
Absolutely, yeah. That's definitely the right philosophy, and the same philosophy that even we apply. When we're talking to our customers. So anyway, coming back to the demo, this is where we would do the HCX migrations as well. So on one side we have the Google Cloud and the HCX tool that we can select. And as mentioned, a lot of this lab is undergoing changes because we are moving into a newer version of this. But fundamentally, you could just choose where you're going to be doing your migration. So for example, this is what I had as a VM, and I can just choose it as part of my migration plan. From then on, I can choose which storage I want to move it into, because as we were talking about it, it could be a vSAN data store, or you could have multiple other data stores that you want to use. You can choose that here. Choose a migration profile, so you can do a vMotion, which is a live migration in case you don't want to have the VM shut off, or you can choose to do a bulk migration in case you have hundreds of VMs and you want to move them from A to B. That becomes possible over here. You want to choose in what state this VM is going to go. For example, it's thick provisioned over here and you want to continue to keep it that way, you can go ahead and do it. You want to change it to thin provisioned, or you just want to leave it the way it is, we can just choose to do it in terms of that. Few more options while we are doing switchovers. You can choose to power off the virtual machine when you move it into the other side, because sometimes, for example, a database VM, when you move it from A to B, there is a sort of window where you need to switch off one and then switch on the other. And if applications work in that same format, you can choose to do that. If you're doing things like a replication assisted vMotion, or if you're doing the DR method of migration, in those cases, you have snapshots that are created, and then the VM is built using the snapshot on the other side. And once it's done, you probably don't want to keep all the snapshots. You can go ahead and choose to remove them, or you can force to unmount those snapshots as well. So that additional flexibility is provided. And then, if based on whatever you need to do, you make the choices that you require. In this case, we don't have a lot of other storages, so you can just choose to select whatever is available by default. And the moment we hit go, it would ideally move forward. But again, I have not done a complete configuration yet, which is why you're not seeing it. And then, of course, these are some of the successful instances of migrations. As you can see, I've done a past migration from on premises into the Google Cloud. It's the same virtual machine. It was done via a vMotion, and you can see that the migration was completed. It tells you at what time it started and at what time it completed. Bear in mind, this is a lab, which is why you see that it took even 10 minutes to do this. But that really is, some of the ways that we simplify lives for a lot of customers using the Google Cloud VMware Engine, really. And this sort of at 30,000 feet in the air is a good demonstration of what this is all about and how simple it is to use. Again, you can also get access to your firewall tables, your subnets. Because we use Google's network, again, we have some unique use cases that we can achieve. Like I mentioned, GCVE works on the concept of peering, which means you have a landing zone or you have a VPC, and you can peer GCVE to that VPC. But because this is built on the same backbone that Google uses for the search engines and all of that, it's a very robust network. It's a very secure network. And it uses certain concepts like global VPC. What happens with that is, rather than you having to configure things like a transit VPC and all of that, which would allow you to talk seamlessly across zones but not go over the internet, we can do that at a global level, which means traditionally, if you were to set up a VMware engine on the other hyperscalers, and let's say you have three VPCs. What would happen is for each VPC, you'd set up a VMware engine.
Mhm.
Now, some hyperscalers will argue that I'd give you a two node configuration, which is great, not taking that away. But with Google, because you can achieve a multi VPC connectivity solution, what you can do is you can spin up one single GCVE engine with the bare minimum three node configuration. This runs NSX, which means you can do network segmentation within your engine, and then you can have multiple VPCs connect to the same engine. So let's just say you've got three VPCs across three different regions, each one of them a little different from the other. Maybe one of them is doing application set A, set B, set C, and all those applications run best on VMware. Happens, it's a lot of times we've seen realistically where customers want to run an application set on VMware. You take those applications, run it on a single VMware engine, do a network segmentation, and then present those segments to the VPCs that you want. So rather than you having to configure multiple VMware engines, you just need one. And with this, we're able to build a good solution because we've provided you density, and at the same time, it's cost effective now. Because even if I were talking about spinning up two node clusters, it would still translate to six nodes of VMware engines as opposed to half of what you're running with GCV. So those are some of the examples of what we really can do and what we've achieved with a lot of customers. Um, and it's worked really well for them. They appreciate this kind of technology sharing and all of that, because you don't want to be spending unnecessarily, right? I spoke about it in the past, being able to play offense in terms of growing your cloud and going into the cloud, accelerating and all of them, but at the same time saving cost. This is how we do it. This is an actual example of playing offense and defense at the same time. And this is, I'm honestly a little proud to say, it's something that's only possible with GCV at this point in time.
Yeah, one thing I want to touch on is, I mean, you mentioned NSX, and obviously NSX is key to a lot of really good business outcomes, whether it's on-prem or in the hyperscalers. So one of the things, as architects, we need to consider is the performance element for NSX
Mhm.
and the resiliency piece. So, Google using 100 gig NICs, I think, is a significant advantage there in terms of the bandwidth. If we talk about, we're effectively collapsing the management components of NSX alongside the workload clusters. So, from an edge perspective, I guess that's where the bandwidth requirements really kick in, right? So
Absolutely.
having those 400 gig NICs, I think, is a huge advantage because you're unlikely to be bottlenecked at the network layer for those
Mhm.
edge for that edge connectivity.
Yeah, and fun fact, we are soon to provide 200 gigs of bandwidth with the
Oh,
direct
now you're just
interconnect.
bragging. That's too much. No, that's fantastic.
Well,
That's really
customers
good.
wanted, so we decided why not give them everything we can. No, but even outside of that, what's important is because of the power of this network, um, we're actually able to provide what we offer. Again, what I mean by this is, I don't want to take names, but there are a lot of hyperscalers that also have these 100 gig interconnects. But when you build the VMware engine is not configured to take advantage of that much. You'd probably be taking advantage of 30 or 40 gigs, which is why when we built the Google engine, we wanted to ensure that it takes advantage and inherits all the benefits of network that Google already has. Which is why when we built the VMware engine, 100 gigs was not uniquely designed for VMware engine, because VMware engine was uniquely designed in tandem with the Google network. We just inherited the benefits. And Google themselves are in a constant and rapid pace of evolution, right? So we understand, with the things like generative AI coming in, with the things like large language modules, with more and more image heavy data coming in, the need for bandwidth is only going to increase. We do talk about 200 gigs being a lot, but you really have to think about it this way. In 1998, Bill Gates introduced Windows 98. And at that time, I remember this because he said, this computer comes with 64 megabytes of RAM. Who's ever going to need more than that? And here we are. Our smartphones have more than 64 megabits of RAM. So if we really have to take it and put it through the lens of the future, there's a possibility that 200 gigs might just become the de facto standard. So Google's preparing for that, and we just happen to inherit the benefits because we architected the solution with an engineering perspective in mind to ensure that whatever is available in A is available in B, and that's just it. That's how we've um, simplified the architectures. In fact, another thing you will see coming in future with the Google VMware Engine is, again, when we look at hyperscalers, we went back to the drawing board on this because all the hyperscalers, we have these concept of nodes, as we call it. It's a host-based solution. And then what happens is, over a period of time, you need to refresh technology. So for example, with Amazon, you had the i3 node, and now you have i4. And this was something that's going to happen in any of the hyperscalers. It's going to happen with us. So when it was happening with us, we asked ourselves a question. If I am going to be refreshing a node, let's say from VE1 standard, which is what we provide today, to VE2 standard, if it's a different node altogether, am I not fundamentally doing the same thing that we'd be doing on premises? Which means I'm talking about a maintenance window, I'm talking about a migration activity, I'm talking about a rolling upgrade. How is a cloud solution going to stand out as opposed to doing this? And then what we did is, with the VE2 nodes, we have currently now introduced it in the US, very soon to roll out across the globe. We have introduced a concept of flexible nodes with VE2. And what we mean by that is, you've got a single configuration of a node. You remember how I spoke about storage only nodes, where you turn off the compute when you don't need it and turn it back on? What if we could actually do that on a compute perspective as well? What if this one node could give you 4 or 5 t-shirt sizes of compute, of memory, of storage? And let's just say today you want to start off with only 64 cores. But in future, you might need 128 or maybe 256. Rather than you having to plan a migration activity and then move you onto a completely different node altogether, same concept. You ask for more cores, you restart the machine, and you have more cores. You need less cores, you ask for less cores, you restart the virtual machine, you have less cores. Same logic, technically as well as commercially. If you are running 64 CPUs, pay for 64 CPUs. If you're running 256, pay for 256. So
I
this
think
is
this really
also,
helps those customers who are really small as well. So there's a lot of customers
absolutely.
who
And
struggle to make that 3-node minimum justifiable commercially. So being able to start with a smaller node size, start with 3 nodes, or even have 4 small nodes instead of
yep,
3 big nodes, for example, is one of the concepts we talk a lot about with HCI and vSAN. So yeah, being able to have 6 smaller nodes might actually give you a better outcome than 3 big nodes. So I think this
absolutely.
is
And
an
with that,
example of
we
that
want to
value.
move away from the concept of nodes. We want to embrace the cloud concept. In the cloud, we call it t-shirt sizes. And going forward with GCVE or with VMware Engine, we're also going to be communicating in terms of t-shirt sizes. So if you got a customer who says, I need to move workloads onto the cloud and the VMware workloads, and they're like, okay, this is the t-shirt size on compute. This is the t-shirt size on storage. This is what you need on memory. Hey, guess what? 1, 2, 3. Put it together. There you go. That's kind of this is it's a bold move for us, and we believe that this is going to rapidly change the way the VMware cloud is also going to be adopted, not just by us but by other hyperscalers. But we also truly believe that this is the right way to go. It's right for technology, it's also right for the customers, and this makes migration windows a lot shorter. This makes upgrades a lot easier, as you move forward. I'm hoping to see a lot more of that in future.
In fact, you touched on a point that I think we should highlight as well. Is one thing that HCI did, when it was introduced, Nutanix and vSAN, it meant that you didn't have that big upgrade of a storage array, every 3 or 5 years. You just add
Right.
nodes, remove some nodes, and the cluster just sort of lives indefinitely. So I think that's one of the values we're seeing here is you start on GCVE, you deploy your cluster, however many nodes you need, or t-shirt sizes, we should say now, and then a new node or t-shirt size comes out, add that to the cluster, migrate the workloads, remove the older t-shirt sizes, and you're good to go on the new hardware. So that hardware
Absolutely.
refresh project, which I'm sure there's a whole bunch of customers listening who know how painful a hardware refresh project is, even though it's quite technically simple. It's not a difficult technical project, but from a
Hmm.
logistical perspective, from a commercial purchasing, procurement, all those aspects, and even just installation time, having enough
Yeah.
rack space to put them in and take the old ones out, and all this stuff, it's a time consuming project. So just having this ability to change your hardware, it might be due to changing requirements, scale up, scale down, or it could be to take advantage of new processor types or simply just new hardware that's there to get a better TCO makes life very simple. So the fact that, yeah, you've now got the ability to choose different t-shirt sizes is very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even when we talk to Google, our logic is simple. Why do we do this? Because we like to keep it real.
Mm.
This entire logic is all about getting real. These are real world problems customer face, and this is what we have to solve for them. Otherwise, what are we really doing? It's how is it different?
Mm.
That's the question that always keeps us going. That's kind of what makes us push the envelope. It's very easy to just stay constant, but constant doesn't really work in the world of technology, does it?
Mm, absolutely. You've got to keep changing and keep challenging ourselves and innovating. So, yeah, it's certainly an interesting time for sure as an architect, and I think for customers as well. And I think you've really nailed GCVE from an overview perspective. And a bit of a shout out to everyone listening as well that we're going to be doing some architectural decision examples on how to deploy GCVE, and what you should choose and things like that, connectivity. So there'll be plenty of follow up episodes, GCVE specific. So yeah, we look forward to having you back for those. And yeah, thank you very much for giving us the overview today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Josh, for having me. I definitely did enjoy doing this session. Really sort of informative for people. I hope all of you listening in also realize value from this. And yeah, I hope to do more of this. There's a lot coming in. I've only scratched the surface in terms of what GCVE can do. And as you see some of the things that we do and some of the things that we've done, I believe that will help fortify a sort of place in the story of VMware Cloud Hyperscalers.
Yeah, well, we definitely look forward to hearing more, and I'm certainly excited for the architectural decision series, and yeah, look forward to recording the next one. So thanks again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Josh.
Cheers.